You are listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest right now is poet Hannah LeGris. Hi, Hannah, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Very excited to hear your poems, and now I'm gonna tell the listeners a little bit about you. Hannah LeGris holds an MA in English Literature from the University of Kentucky and a BA in English from the College of Wooster. She has taught memoir and creative nonfiction with the Young Women Writers Project, the SwallowTale Writing Project, and to University of Kentucky students. Hannah's chapbook, Desire is a Hungry Thing, was published by Workhorse in 2018. Before we hear your work, there is a question that I ask all my guests who teach creative writing, and that is, what is the most important thing you teach your students? If there is one thing you want them to remember from your workshop or from your class, what is it?
That's a great question. And I was thinking about this, but in a different way. Yesterday, I was taking a walk and I was explaining to someone this idea about it being easier to draw a chair when it's turned upside down because you don't already have the form in your mind, so that you can draw it with fresh eyes and you can actually pay attention to the lines. And I was talking about this process of looking. And when I work with my students, which it's typically in memoir, it's kind of about this process of seeing and looking and observing. I think that is the most important thing to take away from a class that I would teach, or it's a thing that I think is foundational. Because I think of writing as first a process of noticing and seeing, and then picking up those details and holding them somewhere, either in one's mind or in a notebook, and figuring out a constellation of meaning. And that works for me when I think about how do little details add up into bigger portraits or bigger themes. And it also helps me when I try to think about why do I see or notice or come back to a certain image or an emotive state or a scene. It's like, why does that thing grab me as a viewer or as someone who's remembering? And that's what I try to work with my students on, is noticing, and then figuring out your why of noticing and how to put those little parts, those snippets, into conversation with one another.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I see that you're holding your chapbook in your hand. Yeah?
I am.
Yeah. So I'll let you tell us about it and read to us whatever you want us to read.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. I'll give a little bit of background about this chapbook. I did a program that some of you may be familiar with Chris McCurry, called the Gauntlet. And when I started with the Gauntlet, I had never written poetry. Maybe I had written things that were akin to poetry, or maybe I'd written poetry but not realized it. But I was going through this time of, in a way, a time of heartbreak, and I needed to shift my creative energies. So I was writing and writing, and I was writing all of these emails, and I was jotting things down, and I thought, this is a new format, and I'm not sure what it is. It might be poetry. And I remember sending some of what I was writing to my friend Robin, A Rabbit Catastrophe. And I said, is this poetry? Can you tell me? And she said, it sounds like you need a generative workshop so that you can figure out if it is. And I said, I don't know if I want to be in a workshop. She said, this one's different. So I applied to the Gauntlet, and I suppose this was in 2016 going on to 2017. So the second time they did the Gauntlet. And I got in. I applied late and I got in. I think I was just tacked on, honestly. They said, okay, you can come. And I did this great workshop with all of these really diverse writers from all different backgrounds. And we were meant to create 100 poems or more in a year, a poem being whatever you decide it is. And I really liked it because we had books that we would read each month of other people's work. And then we would have critical pieces about poetry and the writing process. And then we would have our own projects. And it was really a positive experience in that I had to hold myself to my own standards, but I also knew that the people in the Gauntlet had their own expectations. Like, you needed to show up. And when people came to the workshops, which are on Saturdays, they would say, oh, I've written 12 poems, or I've written 9 poems, or 20 poems. And it was a good thing to have that deadline. And also people would share, like, these were my boundaries. This is why I couldn't write, or this is what caused me to do well. This is what I was thinking about. And then we would write in class as well. And at the end of that, I have to admit, Chris gave me the coin that you get when you make it through. But I did not, I did not do a full 100. But I had enough material that I was pretty close. And I started to curate it together. And when I had started the project, I thought, this is just something I'm doing. I need to get this creative energy out. And Chris was very encouraging, and other people were. They said, I think this has value for other people. Just think about submitting. And that's how I ended up submitting, and henceforth taking ownership of that time capsule of my life, and then having this book as a result. And it was a really positive process to be part of the Gauntlet, and then therefore to have this book afterwards, and to see the other people in the work that was created for the chapbook series, and then also just in the class. So that's the backstory. That's how I started writing poetry. So should I do a little bit of reading? Okay. I'm going to read a couple of poems from the book, and then I'll read a poem that's separate. And the poems from the book are all numbered. They're numbered in the order that I wrote them because I was really trying to get to that 100, but they don't have titles. 29. The glassed-in swimming pool was empty with one exception: a narrow-shouldered girl wearing a mermaid tail. Sitting on a plastic slatted chair, she was framed by the long windows, the metal panes. There were yellow tiles, dim fluorescent lights, and her tail, green, teal, purple, shimmering scales. I walked past her on my way to the lobby, where it was October and a tinsel tree was fully dressed, red bulbs, shiny orbs, gold, silver. A week ago, I'd been holding your hand in bed. Now I was driving my Chrysler company car through the blasted passes, playing the same song on repeat, crying into my hand. The near bare branches, a crisp, wet, heavy with mountain mist. I could taste my own nostalgia, could feel it caught in the slick of my throat. It was my job to keep driving, not to stop and stand in the middle of that forest, not to touch those bloody veined leaves. It's number 4. My friend told me her dog spits his teeth out in her hands, his baby teeth. He knows, she said. He wants to keep them. She spread the teeth on the table after dinner. She counted them. Then she put them all in her palm. I took a photo. On my birthday, you sent me a tooth in the mail, wrapped in gold wire, meant to be worn around the neck or put away in a drawer or displayed on a dresser. The tooth was a shark, off-white, long and jagged in the root. The blood, you said, was yours. You didn't have anything fake. This time, the real would do. My friend told me she would save the teeth until her dog died. She'd bury those little shards with him, or she would keep the teeth until she forgot why. I wanted to, but I couldn't wear that tooth. I didn't have a gold chain. Or I did have a chain, but I knew it would be unwise, having that thing rest there on my body, those pointed edges touching my collarbone. Another reminder. It would be unsettling. It would be confrontational. I was afraid I'd like it. She would give those teeth to me and I'd mail them to you. I told you my front tooth has 2 roots, the dead one, or the living, I can't remember. Either way, when I asked about it, they said it wouldn't break. They pressed something very cold to the surface. I couldn't feel it. Watch it, they told me. Just wait and see. If it changes, if it seems worse, then we can look again. She asked me this summer, does all of this bring you more joy than it does pain? They said, if it changes. They meant if it gets uglier. We've never seen anything like that. I had a dream I was walking a small dog. I don't remember whose. My teeth were crushed, blood crackling the surface of my enamel. They were all dead or dying. I couldn't find my dentist and I couldn't find your dentist either. I pictured the double root outlined in the x-ray. You said to me in bed, tell them to give you a wooden tooth, one like George Washington. Tell them to make it and screw it in, then add hippopotamus bone on top. The one picture of us that exists is edited, bleached. We look good. I can see my tooth, but you can't. It's not visible to the untrained eye. I look good and you look vacant. I'm laughing. He knows, she said. He wants me to keep them. That's him. He's like that. I don't believe that's a shark's tooth you got in your stocking. I believe it's something else. They lied to you. It's not right. It's an experiment. He doesn't just spit them in her hands, but also in her lap. She said, people call me his mommy, but that's not what I am. People said, I'm teaching you something with my body, but that's not what I'm doing. Then what am I? They said, this is good for him. If there's one thing I can't deal with, it's pressure. That's your voice to the phone. And still my teeth hurt at night or in the morning. When I was younger, my parents had to crank my palate wider. They had to spread the bones in my face. I could feel it building, the pressure. Every night I felt like my nose would break, would crack. Vertically through the center. Finally, they said we could stop. I can tell you it didn't work. I can tell you I have an overbite that's only getting worse. The first time we kissed, you let me run my tongue along your teeth, hold it across the interior of the incisors. I know, some men don't like that, because that means you have to wait. I don't see anything. Look at him. He's learning. It's not visible to the untrained eye. Off-white plus the blood. That's fake. I'll read this. I'm going to read my bonus poem and put it into the mix. It has a title. Same theme. The Durian I never had. In the late afternoon, he slid a knife through, a practiced hand, a smooth line, slipped half his fingers in and cracked open the rest. It was over AstroTurf. I saw through the screen door. He was crouched there and it was hot. 85 degrees or more. I could smell the damp musk of the leather and his hand was deep inside. All of this, he said, feels like organs, feels like something's not right. 3 years later, I opened the package, took out the cloth, put it over my face, and breathed in. Saw him scoop out the interior, saw the kitchen again, saw a tangled ochre mess. You can't write about the durian until you've tasted a good one, even if it's about the rotten insides, he said, even if it's about when I cut it open and threw away the flesh. Let's see. I'm gonna find another one. I love lists. Lists are what inform a lot of my poems. I love a good list poem. So here's one. Number 35. Tasted his drink, tasted his 2 drinks, touched his arm under the table, said I could be there in the morning, took the cake out of his hand, let myself in, knew where the key was, had my postcards on the fridge, turned off the bedroom light, thought about Durian, thought about respect, tried to breathe evenly, left the bedroom, jacked off, took a Benadryl, said we might never share a bed again, said you just never know, said he'd have Christmas in Kentucky, came into the guest room in the morning, laid under the afghan, talked about the dog's ears, talked about his mother, talked about the winter branches, talked about the tone of the sky, recounted the first time we met, recounted how he was sweating, recounted the tone, recounted. I'm gonna read another bonus. I was just talking about this time. I was taking a long drive in the direction of my hometown. And I remember thinking, gosh, I really want some Lee's Famous Recipe chicken. That's the title of this poem. Lee's Famous Recipe chicken. In the parking lot of Lee's Famous Recipe, every Thursday, we ate fried livers out of cardboard to-go containers and waited for 9 p.m. when the kissing could begin. Charlie's boots were covered in flour, grease, and later, the bleach he poured down the drain. Everyone had trucks, and that same summer, I careened mine off the driveway, and it caught on a sapling, the only breakable thing keeping the undercarriage from cracking loose and tipping, then rolling down the cliff into the creek bed. I was brushing my hair while driving. I was wearing a polo shirt. The same season, I slammed the passenger side of my vehicle along a guardrail, taking the back way home too fast. I was lost, and it was before cell phones, 10 minutes prior to curfew, and I was nearly 20 miles from home. Screaming, I ran to a darkened house, banged on the door, demanded to use the phone. I had been jumping on the trampoline, sucking my boyfriend's dick, and eating fried hot dogs for too many hours. He had a little brother 10 years younger, the thinnest mother I'd ever seen, and an always drunk father. They let us keep the bedroom door closed. His front tooth was so crooked that it was halfway turned around. And on that bed, in that dark, I could see his pale body shine. Well, let's see. Well, I'm going to do one more poem. Maybe 2. I'll tell you. All right. I'll do one last list poem. They're not all lists, but they're the most fun to read. Number 36. Said things would have been different in the light of day. Said maybe they wouldn't. Said this was his poetry book. Said some parts were inappropriate. Said he wouldn't show his family. Said the font was Times New Roman. Said the gold pen was perfect. Said he would write the title. Said it would do. Said he felt restless. Said make yourself decent. Said you sleep where you want. Said that's on you. Said that's your issue. Said I had my toothbrush in my pocket. Said you held my hand when I left. Said tell your family thank you. Said take a left at the light. Said there had been no kissing. Said there had been no problem. Said go through the tunnel. Said nothing had come to pass. Said it was morning. Said my hair smelled like smoke. Said there's nothing to apologize for. Said there might be. Said kiss my cheek when you leave. Said be careful going home. That's it.
Wow, Hannah, these are great. I didn't want it to end.
Well, thank you.
So if you have to write 100 poems about something again, what would you write about?
Wow, if I had to write 100 poems about something again, what would I write about? You know, that's a tough one.
Well, maybe you don't have one right now, but if you do, you know, what would have that much energy for you to sustain you?
I think that I would have to choose some themes. When I was writing these 100 poems this time, I had been in this period of real obsession, which is very much reflected in this book. And sometimes it's hard to find that balance between consistent writing and just keeping on writing, and that obsessive, like, I've got to make something, that different type of energy. So I don't know the answer to that one, because I think that I would have to start out by drawing. You know, I was thinking about what is a poem, and something I really enjoyed in the Gauntlet was that sometimes we could draw or make a collage. And the way I sometimes think about poetry has to do with this idea of like bricolage or collage, like a pastiche of sorts. And so I think I would have to start by making and drawing, and then I would have to see what kind of images were coming out of that. Because when I was writing these, I was in a very intense period of my life, and I've never felt that same kind of like, gotta get it down type feeling. So I'm not sure, but I think it would be a multifaceted project.
And it sounds like you would do what you teach your students, the most important thing you teach your students, to turn the chair backwards and to observe and to see and to notice. Mm-hmm. And all these different ways of taking things in.
That's exactly right. And I think that in order to get in the right headspace, we have to reorient our minds. I know that I have to create a lot of mental space for myself so that something can hook me, if that makes sense. So if I'm walking around and I'm thinking and my mind has more space, then I'm more likely to be able to pick up on elements. If I find myself preoccupied or worrying about work or other things that maybe are nagging at my attention, then I can't attend as easily to points of surprise or points of beauty. And I think that goes the same for reading, the process of reading, because sometimes, like, if I'm reading even Harper's Magazine and I can find like a couple of lines of surprising brightness, then even the process of marking those and writing those down starts the process of attending and noticing in other parts of our lives. And it also takes listening to conversations with a writerly ear, because sometimes there are surprising snippets in there, and thinking, oh, why did that stand out to me? Does it relate to this other thing I was reading or thinking about or looking at? And it requires space. So
that's exactly what I keep on repeating to anybody who would listen, is that writing is not a matter of time, but a matter of space.
Yeah.
Space in the head. Exactly what you're speaking about. My other question is, are you signing up for Lexington Poetry Month?
It's now, correct?
It's going to be in June, so you still have some time to sign up. Well, I was just asking if you're signing up. I sign up every year, and I don't always write 30 poems in 30 days, but I always sign up.
I'd like to, because I made some neat packages that were poetic in nature in April for National Poetry Month, and it would be good motivation to create that space that we're talking about for June. Maybe I should sign up. I've never done it.
I don't know. If you sign up, I'll be reading your work. Thank you so much, Hannah. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and to hear your poems.
Likewise. I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about writing and to do some reading. It was a real pleasure to be able to be on your show.
Thank you and have a good week.